The story begins when scientists, while searching for a cure to a deadly virus, accidentally create something far more terrifying, a deadly rain. Anyone who comes into contact with this rain becomes infected almost instantly, dying in unbearable pain. In just a single night, an entire city is wiped off the map. The story begins at a university in Denmark, where a young woman named Simone is rushing to her classroom to take an exam. But before she can get there, her father, Frederick, suddenly shows up, grabs her without any explanation, and forces her into his car. Inside, her younger brother Rasmus and their mother are already waiting. Without telling his family what is happening, Frederick drives at full speed toward a secret underground bunker hidden deep inside a forest. The bunker was built by the company he works for, Apollo. At the same time, the weather is rapidly getting worse, and heavy rain is about to begin. As Frederick speeds down the road, several vehicles crash into one another, completely blocking the highway. Furious drivers step out, ready to confront him. But Frederick is in far too much of a hurry to stop. He immediately orders his family out of the car and rushes toward the forest, where the bunker is located. By then, the rain has already begun to fall. Fortunately, Frederick reaches the bunker just in time. Using his fingerprint, he unlocks the massive door and quickly gets his family safely inside before sealing it shut. Once inside, Simone and Rasmus are left completely confused. They cannot understand why their father has brought them there. The bunker is fully equipped with enough food and water to last for years, along with its own independent air filtration system. Realizing that something is terribly wrong, Simone is about to demand an explanation from Frederick. But before she could, he put on a full protective suit and prepared to leave the bunker. Before walking out, he gave Simone one final warning. No matter what happened, they were not to leave the bunker under any circumstances until he personally returned to get them. Desperate for answers, Simone stopped him and demanded to know what was really going on. This time, Frederick finally revealed the truth. The rain outside was carrying a deadly virus. Anyone who came into contact with it became infected instantly, suffered unbearable pain, and died within moments. Since Frederick was one of the few scientists who might be able to find a cure, he had to reach Apollo's headquarters as quickly as possible. Before leaving, he also made Simone promise something that seemed strangely important. Whatever happened, she had to take special care of Rasmus. Frederick hinted that when the time came to fix everything, he would need Rasmus for a reason he could not explain. Even after hearing all of this, Simone was still completely confused. But before she could ask anything else, Frederick left the bunker. A few moments later, Simone checked the internet on her phone. What she saw made her blood run cold. Every news outlet was flooded with reports of people dying across the country. Panic had spread everywhere, and no one seemed to understand what was happening. Trying to stay calm, Simone sat down with Rasmus, while their mother reassured them that they were safe inside the bunker. She reminded them that, no matter what happened, they must never go outside. Just then, someone suddenly started banging on the bunker door. Rasmus immediately assumed it was their father returning. Ignoring his mother's desperate warnings, he rushed over and unlocked the entrance. Standing outside was a man who had already been infected by the rain. He was writhing in agony, barely able to stand, and desperately reached out, trying to drag Rasmus outside with him. At that exact moment, Rasmus's mother pulled him back into the bunker. Then, without thinking twice, she shoved the infected man away. In the process, she stepped into the rain herself. The deadly water touched her, and within seconds, she became infected. She collapsed to the ground, screaming in unbearable pain. Even as the virus consumed her, her only concern was her children. With her final strength, she begged Simone and Rasmus to always take care of each other. Fighting back tears, Simone slowly closed the bunker door, sealing them safely inside while leaving her mother outside. Moments later, Simone desperately tried calling Frederick, but no matter how many times she dialed, his phone never connected. With every failed attempt, her fear grew even stronger. Then she remembered what Frederick had told her before leaving. No matter how scared she felt, she had to stay strong and act normal in front of Rasmus. Pulling herself together, Simone began inspecting the bunker's systems. That was when she discovered something unexpected. Their bunker was not the only one. Apollo had secretly built several similar bunkers throughout the city. Hoping that someone else had survived, Simone tried contacting the other bunkers, but none of them responded. While searching through the supplies, she eventually found a radio. Using it, she managed to establish contact with a man who was hiding in his own basement. He explained that the situation outside had become catastrophic. The virus was spreading everywhere, and the few survivors they could still rescue were being transported to the nearest hospital in a desperate attempt to save as many lives as possible. After hearing this, Simone gave the man Frederick's phone number and asked him to try contacting him. But despite several attempts, he couldn't reach Frederick either. The man sadly admitted that, judging by the conditions outside, Frederick was probably already dead. Surviving out there seemed almost impossible. Just then, the city's power suddenly went out, cutting off the radio signal and leaving Simone completely isolated. With no way to contact the outside world, she accepted that she was on her own and devoted herself entirely to taking care of Rasmus. A week passed, but Frederick never returned. Unable to wait any longer, Simone finally gathered the courage to leave the bunker. Wearing a full protective suit, she walked all the way to the bunker's entrance. However, the moment she reached the door, terrifying memories of her mother's painful death came rushing back. The trauma overwhelmed her, and she lost the courage to step outside. Frightened, she turned around and went back into the bunker. Rasmus didn't want her to leave either. Despite being so young, he had already realized that the world outside was far too dangerous. Days slowly turned into weeks, and before they knew it, an entire month had passed. Taking care of Rasmus all by herself was becoming harder with each passing day. Even so, Simone never gave up. She did everything she could to be a good sister and protect him. At the same time, she continued learning more about the bunker and everything stored inside it. During this time, she suddenly remembered something strange that had happened shortly before the disaster. Rasmus had once been infected by a mysterious virus that no doctor could identify. Back then, Frederick had personally created an antidote and successfully cured him. However, Apollo had also learned about that mysterious virus and demanded that Frederick submit all of his research and reports. That memory made Simone wonder if there was a connection. Could it be that Frederick himself had created the very virus that had destroyed the world? Back in the present, nearly 6 years had passed. Yet after all that time, Simone still had no idea whether her father was alive or dead. By now, Rasmus had grown into a teenager. With their food supplies almost exhausted, he insisted that they had no choice but to venture outside and search for more. Although Simone finally agreed, she wanted to make sure the outside world was safe enough before taking Rasmus with her. So that night, after Rasmus had fallen asleep, she quietly put on her protective suit and prepared to leave the bunker once again. As she approached the exit, the painful memories of her mother's death came flooding back. For a moment, fear almost stopped her. But this time, she forced herself to keep moving. Stepping outside, she saw that her mother's body had long since decomposed into nothing but a skeleton. Nearby, a lone deer wandered through the silent forest, proving that wildlife had reclaimed the abandoned world. Curious, Simone continued forward. The roads were littered with abandoned cars, while thick forests had swallowed almost everything in sight. Ignoring the eerie landscape, she headed straight for the hospital where survivors were once supposed to be taken. She repeatedly called out, hoping someone was still alive, but no one answered. When she finally went inside, she was met with an even more horrifying sight. The hospital had been completely destroyed. Corpses were scattered everywhere, and there wasn't a single living person left. Suddenly, a wolf appeared right in front of her. Terrified, Simone ran into a nearby room and hid until the animal finally wandered away. After narrowly escaping, she hurried back to the bunker. There, she told Rasmus everything she had seen. The outside world was even worse than they had imagined. If they wanted any chance of surviving, they would have to find another one of Apollo's bunkers somewhere nearby. Rasmus agreed without hesitation. The two of them decided that the very next morning, they would leave together and search for another bunker. After packing everything they could carry and preparing their supplies, they finally went to sleep. But in the middle of the night, a new crisis struck. The bunker's oxygen level suddenly began dropping at an alarming rate, and neither Simone nor Rasmus had any idea it was happening. As the oxygen continued to decrease, Simone eventually lost consciousness. Fortunately, Rasmus woke up just in time after the emergency alarm started blaring throughout the bunker. Realizing something was terribly wrong, he immediately picked Simone up and rushed her outside as quickly as he could. In the panic, neither of them even had time to put on their protective suits. But once they stepped outside, something unexpected happened. Neither of them experienced any symptoms. They could breathe normally. That could only mean one thing. After all these years, the deadly virus was no longer present in the air, and they could finally survive outside without wearing protective gear. However, before they could process what had happened, a group of armed strangers suddenly surrounded them and held them at gunpoint. It turned out, these people had spotted Simone during her earlier trip outside. After watching her return to the bunker, they had secretly cut off its oxygen supply. Their plan was simple: force Simone and Rasmus out, take them hostage, and loot whatever food and supplies were hidden inside the bunker. At gunpoint, they locked the siblings inside one of the bunker rooms, while the rest of the group searched the facility for food. But after turning the entire bunker upside down, they found nothing. Simone and Rasmus had already used almost all of their supplies over the past 6 years. Furious, the group's leader, Martin, decided to leave the siblings locked inside. But Simone knew that if they stayed trapped in that sealed room, they would eventually die. Thinking quickly, she wrote a message on a glass panel, telling Martin that she knew where they could find more food. Then, right in front of him, she deliberately smashed the tablet that contained the map of every Apollo bunker. The message was clear. If Martin wanted to find those supplies, he would have to keep Simone and Rasmus alive, because the only remaining map now existed inside Simone's memory. As Martin stared at her, An old memory suddenly resurfaced. Years earlier, before the world collapsed, Martin had been a soldier. As the infection spread across the country, he had been assigned to guard a bridge and stop anyone from leaving the quarantined city so the virus wouldn't spread any farther. One day, while on duty, he spotted a woman carrying a small child as she tried to cross the bridge. Martin fired several warning shots around her, hoping to stop her. But the woman never slowed down. She continued walking toward the other side without showing even the slightest fear. Unable to bring himself to shoot a helpless mother and her child, Martin let them go. Moments later, one of his fellow soldiers urgently called him back to the military tent nearby, where the rest of his unit was stationed. That was when Martin learned the horrifying truth. The woman he had allowed to cross the bridge had already been infected, and after she entered their camp, the infection began spreading among the soldiers. One by one, they started dying. Martin's final surviving teammate died right in front of him while explaining what had happened. Watching the last person he trusted succumb to the infection completely shattered him. From that moment on, Martin made a promise to himself. If he wanted to survive, he would never trust anyone again. That painful memory flashed through his mind as he returned to the present. Because of it, he initially refused Simone's offer. However, his teammate Patrick reminded him of the harsh reality. The rest of their group was already starving. Without food, none of them would survive much longer. Left with no other choice, Martin finally accepted Simone's deal. He released Simone and Rasmus from the locked room and allowed them to travel with his group. For Simone and Rasmus, simply being outside after spending 6 years trapped underground felt almost unreal. As they continued their journey, the siblings learned more about what the world had become. Martin's group explained that food had become so scarce after the collapse that some desperate survivors had even resorted to killing, and in some cases, eating other people just to stay alive. Hearing that horrifying truth left Simone and Rasmus completely speechless. Just then, another group appeared not far from them. They launched several drones equipped with thermal sensors, scanning the area for human body heat. But these people weren't searching for survivors to rescue them. They were hunting people down so they could kill and eat them. The moment Martin spotted the drones, he immediately covered Simone and everyone else with aluminum foil. The foil blocked their body heat, making them invisible to the drone's thermal cameras. However, 2 other survivors were still out in the open. One of them, a frightened young woman, came running straight towards Simone's group while desperately trying to escape. Seeing her in danger, Simone begged everyone to help save her. But Martin refused without hesitation. He knew that risking the entire group for one stranger could get them all killed. Just then, Beatrice, one of Martin's teammates, sided with Simone. Together, the 2 women ran after the terrified survivor. Meanwhile, the woman had reached a small river, where she slipped and fell into the water. The cannibal group quickly caught up and was just about to kill her. Before they could, Martin suddenly appeared and shot both attackers dead. No matter how cold he seemed, Martin never abandoned the people on his own team. Unfortunately, there was nothing he could do for the woman. The moment she fell into the contaminated water, she had already become infected. With no other choice, Martin sadly shot her before the virus could take over completely. Only then did Simone finally understand the terrifying truth. Walking on dry land was no longer the biggest danger. The real threat was the rain. Even standing water left behind by the rain could still carry the deadly virus and infect anyone who touched it. Afterward, Simone led the group toward another bunker she knew about. It would take them nearly a full day to reach it. Before nightfall, they stopped at an abandoned house to rest. Inside, they found supplies left behind by dead hunters, including clean drinking water. Without wasting a second, John gave the water to Leah, the sick member of their group. Watching everyone genuinely care for one another changed Simone's perspective. At first, she had only planned to use Martin's group to safely reach the bunker, but now she truly wanted to help them survive. The following morning, they continued their journey. Along the way, Rasmus accidentally stepped into a puddle of rainwater. The moment Martin saw it, he immediately raised his gun, ready to shoot Rasmus before the infection could spread. But Simone rushed in front of her brother and stopped him. She quickly removed Rasmus's boot and checked his sock. To everyone's relief, it was completely dry. His boot was waterproof, meaning the contaminated water had never reached his skin. Realizing there was no risk of infection, Martin lowered his weapon. Soon afterward, the group finally reached the second bunker. As soon as Simone placed her fingerprint on the scanner, the massive bunker door unlocked. Inside, they discovered exactly what they had been hoping for. The bunker was packed with enough food and supplies to keep Martin's group alive for years. Everyone was overwhelmed with relief and immediately began eating after spending so long starving. Even so, Simone planned to leave with Rasmus soon afterward. She still didn't fully trust Martin or the others, knowing that in this new world, anyone could turn on them at any moment. She even spoke to Martin about leaving. Martin calmly explained that Simone had spent the last 6 years hidden safely inside a bunker. She had no idea how brutal the outside world had become. He insisted that he wasn't a bad person, but in a world like this, trusting someone wasn't a luxury anyone could afford anymore. Despite his words, Simone remained unconvinced and walked deeper into the bunker. While looking around, she suddenly noticed a phone sitting there, still charging. Her heart skipped a beat. The phone's wallpaper showed an old childhood photo of Simone and Rasmus. It was their father's phone. After leaving their original bunker years ago, Frederick had apparently stayed in this bunker for some time. Without wasting another second, Simone and Rasmus searched through the phone, hoping to find some clue about what had happened to him. That's when they discovered a video message left by Frederick. In the recording, he explained that he had been called to a headquarters in Sweden because they believed he was the only scientist capable of creating a cure for the deadly rain virus. The moment Simone learned this, she made up her mind. She decided that she and Rasmus would travel to the headquarters in Sweden. There was still a chance that their father was alive. She shared her plan with Martin, secretly hoping he would agree to help them. But Martin refused without hesitation. Inside the bunker, they were completely safe. Leaving it would mean risking everything. To reach the headquarters in Sweden, they would first have to cross the middle of a ruined city filled with unknown dangers and ruthless hunters. After that, they would still have to make it across a heavily guarded bridge, making the journey almost impossible. Martin begged Simone to abandon the idea. The video she had found was already 6 years old. By now, Frederick was most likely dead, and if he had actually succeeded in creating a cure, news of it would have spread long ago. Even Martin, who had survived outside all these years, had never heard anything about a cure. But Simone refused to give up hope. She packed a few days' worth of supplies and left the bunker with Rasmus. Meanwhile, Beatrice decided to join them, along with John and Leah. She genuinely wanted to help Simone. Leah also knew that if Simone hadn't led them to this bunker, she probably wouldn't have survived. Besides, Martin and Patrick had once almost killed all three of them. Back then, they had been complete strangers. Martin and Patrick had captured Beatrice, John, and Leah with the intention of robbing them. To save their lives, Beatrice revealed the location of a secret hideout where their group had been storing food. Instead of killing them, Martin decided to follow them there. That night, the five of them shared a proper meal, talked for hours, and realized they actually enjoyed each other's company. Later that night, Beatrice suggested that they should stay together as one group. Martin would lead them and protect everyone, while the others would follow his decisions. Martin agreed, and from that day on, they had survived together as a team. Back in the present, Simone and Rasmus had no idea that Beatrice, John, and Leah had decided to follow them. They continued moving forward and eventually reached the outskirts of the city. The destruction there was far worse than anything they had seen before. One glance at the ruined streets was enough to understand just how devastating the deadly rain had truly been. As they continued, they came across an abandoned bus blocking the road. Exhausted from the long journey, the siblings climbed inside, hoping to rest for a while. But only a short time later, they noticed several shadows moving outside the bus. Both of them immediately fell silent, fearing that hunters had found them. A few tense moments later, the truth became clear. The people outside weren't hunters at all. They were Beatrice, John, and Leah, who had quietly followed them all the way there. The moment Simone saw them, she was genuinely happy. She urged the three of them to return to the bunker, reminding them that they could finally live safely there without constantly risking their lives. But the three had already made up their minds. Instead of going back, they wanted to stay with Simone and continue the journey together. Not long afterward, the group stopped at a nearby spot to eat and regain their strength. Suddenly, several hunters appeared in the area. Realizing they had been spotted, everyone immediately scattered and ran in different directions. During the chaos, Simone became separated from the rest of the group. As she ran through the deserted streets, she reached a wire fence covered with countless missing person posters. Looking at all those faces, she couldn't help but feel heartbroken. Just then, she noticed a small boy standing all alone on the other side of the fence. Dark clouds were already gathering, and the rain could start at any moment. Without wasting time, Simone grabbed the child and rushed with him into a nearby building. Inside, she noticed something heartbreaking. The hungry little boy was swallowing painkillers just to ease the pain of his empty stomach. Seeing this, Simone immediately took out some of her own food and gave it to him. At that moment, the boy's father arrived. When he saw his son finally eating real food, he became overwhelmed with emotion. He repeatedly thanked Simone for saving his child. He also warned her to leave the town as soon as possible. The place had become home to some of the most dangerous people left alive. If his son hadn't been receiving treatment there, he would have escaped long ago. As it turned out, there was still a doctor living near the town who continued treating the remaining survivors. After hearing this, Simone gave them even more food so they could survive for the next few days. She hoped that once the boy recovered, they would leave that dangerous place forever. The grateful father thanked her again before leaving with his son after the rain had finally stopped. But the moment they stepped outside, a crowd of desperate survivors surrounded them. The instant they noticed the food in the child's hands, they attacked like wild animals. Within moments, Both the father and his son were brutally killed. Watching the horrifying scene unfold right in front of her left, Simone, completely terrified. Barely managing to escape unnoticed, she ran until she reached an abandoned bakery. There, she was finally reunited with the rest of her group. But before anyone could relax, another armed survivor suddenly entered the bakery. He pressed a knife against Rasmus's throat and demanded that Simone and the others hand over all of their food. Before he could do anything else, Martin and Patrick suddenly appeared behind him and held him at gunpoint. Thanks to them, Rasmus's life was saved. Seeing Martin and Patrick again filled Beatrice, John, and Leah with relief. Deep down, they had always hoped the two of them would come after them. The truth was, after Beatrice left the bunker, Martin had never been able to stop thinking about her. Without realizing it, he had grown deeply attached to her. For the moment, however, the armed man only wanted to save his own life. He suddenly stabbed Rasmus before making a run for it. Everyone immediately rushed to help Rasmus as blood poured from the wound. Simone quickly remembered another bunker nearby, where Rasmus might be able to receive proper treatment. Without wasting a second, the group placed him inside a shopping cart and hurried toward the bunker. But the moment they arrived, all hope vanished. The bunker door had already been forced open. Everything inside had been looted. Every bit of food, medicine, and useful equipment was gone. With nothing else available, Martin sealed Rasmus's wound with duct tape to slow the bleeding. Later, after Rasmus had fallen asleep, Martin showed Simone something he had discovered. It was the location of a massive wall. Years ago, that wall had never existed. Someone had built it afterward, completely surrounding the city. It became obvious that everything inside had been turned into a quarantine zone. If anyone still wanted the chance to survive, they would eventually have to find a way beyond that wall. The idea sounded unbelievable, yet the more Simone thought about it, the more it made sense. She finally agreed to help Martin carry out that plan. But before leaving the quarantine zone, she had two priorities. She had to save her brother, and she still wanted to find her father. To save Rasmus, the group decided to seek out a doctor who lived on the other side of a nearby bridge. Unfortunately, reaching him wouldn't be easy. The bridge was heavily controlled by hunters, so they came up with a dangerous plan. Simone deliberately ran toward the bridge, making sure she was seen. Within minutes, the hunters located her using their surveillance drones and immediately started chasing her. Leaving them exactly where she wanted, Simone lured the entire group into an abandoned factory. The moment the hunters entered, Martin and the others surrounded them at gunpoint. Martin wanted information about their base and the rest of their people, but the hunters refused to say a single word. Martin prepared to execute them on the spot. Simone immediately objected. She didn't want Martin to become the kind of person who killed without hesitation. She believed that once they crossed that line, there would no longer be any difference between them and the monsters they were fighting. But Martin refused to listen. Just then, John noticed a strange tattoo on one of the hunters' hands. The moment he saw it, his expression completely changed. Without explaining anything, he told Martin to kill them if he had to, and suddenly ran out of the factory. No one understood why he reacted that way. For the time being, Martin ordered everyone else to leave the building as well. Only after they had all stepped outside did 3 loud gunshots echo from inside. A few moments later, Martin walked out alone. No one needed an explanation. They all knew exactly what had happened. Martin simply told everyone to stop thinking about it and get into the hunter's vehicle. More hunters could arrive at any moment. Using the stolen vehicle, they drove across the bridge toward the doctor's house. But the atmosphere inside the vehicle had completely changed. Martin's ruthless actions had left everyone disturbed. No one was affected more than John. His mind remained fixed on the hunter with the tattoo. That single symbol had brought back memories he had spent years trying to forget. The story then shifts several years into the past. Against all odds, John had survived the deadly rain. But without food or clean water, he was only days away from dying. After wandering for what felt like forever, he finally collapsed near a house from complete exhaustion. Just then, a young woman found him lying unconscious. She took him inside her home, where her entire family welcomed him without hesitation. They gave him a proper meal, cared for him, and even invited him to stay and live with them as one of their own. John accepted their offer without hesitation. For the first time since the world had fallen apart, he finally felt safe. But that feeling didn't last long. Moments later, the sound of vehicles echoed from outside. The girl's father immediately recognized it. Hunters. Without wasting a second, he hid John and his daughter inside a nearby shed. Before they could escape, the hunters stormed into the house. They brutally murdered the man's wife first. Then they found him and killed him as well. One of the hunters had the exact same tattoo John had recognized earlier. At that moment, John realized he was looking at the very man who had slaughtered the family that had saved his life. Watching her father die, the young girl was about to scream. John desperately covered her mouth to keep the hunters from finding them. Eventually, the hunters left. But when John finally removed his hand from the girl's mouth, his heart sank. She had stopped breathing. Whether from fear, panic, or suffocation, she was already dead. The realization shattered John. The guilt of what had happened stayed with him forever. Afterward, he buried both the father and his daughter with his own hands. Overwhelmed by grief and guilt, John even began thinking about ending his own life. But before he could do anything, Leah and Beatrice found him. They brought him into their group and gave him a reason to keep living. Back in the present, those painful memories still haunted John. A short while later, the group finally arrived in the neighborhood where the doctor was supposed to live. But there was one major problem. The area was filled with dozens of abandoned houses. Finding a single doctor among them wasn't going to be easy. Eventually, using a drone, they managed to locate the doctor's house. The moment they approached it, the doctor came outside holding a gun and immediately aimed it at the entire group. Thankfully, Simone managed to calm her down before anything happened. She quickly showed the Dr. Rasmus's condition. Seeing how badly he was injured, the doctor finally agreed to help. She brought Rasmus inside along with the others and carefully stitched up his wound. After receiving treatment, Rasmus's condition gradually began to improve. While talking to the doctor, Simone learned that she had once had a husband and 2 daughters, but she had lost all of them during the very first deadly rain. Since then, she had been living completely alone. Even after everything she had lost, she never refused to help anyone who came to her asking for medical treatment. Hearing this, Simone decided to tell her about her father, Frederick. The moment the doctor heard his name, her expression suddenly changed. For a brief moment, she looked completely shocked. A little later, she took Simone and Rasmus to a bunker hidden near her house. It looked exactly like the bunker where Simone and Rasmus had survived for the last 6 years. That could only mean one thing. The doctor had once worked for Apollo, the same company as Frederick. Once inside, she prepared an injection that would help Rasmus recover much faster. But before she could administer it, Simone once again tried to ask her about Frederick. The doctor calmly replied that she knew nothing about him. According to her, she had never even heard of anyone by that name. Hearing that made no sense to Simone. Her father had been one of Apollo's oldest and most respected scientists. There was no way someone who had worked for the company wouldn't know who Frederick was. Realizing something wasn't right, Simone kept pressing her for the truth. Finally, the doctor confessed. She hated Frederick. In her eyes, one of his experiments had been responsible for creating the deadly rain that wiped out millions of lives, including her own family. And that was the real reason she had brought Simone and Rasmus into the bunker. She hadn't brought them there to save them. She had brought them there to kill them. The moment Simone heard those words, she froze in complete shock. Meanwhile, outside the house, Martin and the others suddenly heard the sound of several vehicles approaching. A group of hunters had arrived. They were the very same hunters Martin had captured earlier, but had chosen to spare. The moment John spotted the hunter with the tattoo, he didn't hesitate for a second. He grabbed his gun and shot the man dead. Seeing one of their own killed instantly, the remaining hunters aimed all their weapons at John. Martin was just about to open fire to save him, but Patrick stopped him. They were badly outnumbered. Attacking now would only get everyone killed. With no other choice, they reluctantly decided to save John later. Even Martin knew Patrick was right. Without wasting any more time, Martin and Patrick rushed off to find Simone and Res. Before long, they reached the doctor's bunker. Inside, Simone was desperately trying to convince the doctor to change her mind, but the doctor refused to listen. Realizing there was no other option, Patrick immediately shot her, killing her before she could hurt Simone or Rasmus. After escaping the bunker together, the group once again began searching for another safe place to stay. As they traveled, Patrick couldn't hide his frustration anymore. He blamed Martin for letting those hunters live. If Martin had killed them when he had the chance, John would never have been captured. Deep down, Martin knew Patrick was right. He regretted his decision as well, but he refused to show that weakness in front of the others. Later that night, while Martin sat alone, Simone quietly walked over to him. She apologized for asking him to spare those hunters. If she hadn't stopped him that day, none of this would have happened. Martin accepted her apology. The two of them agreed that from now on, each of them would make their own decisions without forcing the other to follow. The next morning, the group continued searching for John while making their way through the forest. But before long, dark clouds gathered overhead. Another deadly rainstorm was about to begin. They desperately searched for somewhere to take shelter. Unfortunately, there wasn't a single safe place nearby. For a terrifying moment, it seemed as though this was where their journey would finally end. But Martin refused to give up. At the last possible moment, he spotted an abandoned mansion. The group rushed inside just before the rain arrived. However, the moment they entered, they realized they weren't alone. Several strangers slowly surrounded them from every direction. What made the situation even more terrifying was that these people showed absolutely no fear of the guns pointed at them. They simply kept walking closer. For the first time in a long while, even Martin and the others looked genuinely frightened. Who were these mysterious people? What did they want? Would Simone and the others survive this new threat? And would they ever find John again? Those answers will be revealed in the next part of the story. But before we continue, I want to know what you think. Are you enjoying this story so far? And should I continue with part 2? Let me know in the comments. If even 100 of you ask for the next part, I'll bring it as soon as possible. And here's one more question for you. If you were trapped in a world like this, what would your priority be? Saving others or doing whatever it takes to survive yourself. If you enjoyed this recap, don't forget to leave a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more thrilling movie explanation. I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.